Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening. It depends upon what time zone you're in. But let me let you know you are in the Jazz Zone. My name is Roscoe Lee Owens, and I am your host in the Jazz Zone. And like no other show, we have a fabulous guest, a very special guest, Clarence Ezekiel Washington. And, you know, it's all about the truth. And we came up with this acronym, which was FAB, and that's fabulous. And that's Find Another Brother. Or it's about the foundation and some other components. But we're going to start with the foundation, and I'm going to allow you to meet and greet Ezekiel.
It's a pleasure being here and an honor as well. Thank you.
First of all, it's my pleasure and our honor in the Jazz Zone to have you here as a historian and a technologist.
Yes, sir.
And I want to start with the F part of finding another brother, the foundation.
Everything has to be foundational, as you know. Yes, sir.
Yes, we can. We can foundation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, share.
Back in about 1995, we saw that our community was in dire needs, dealing with the information technology, dealing with technology as a whole. So collectively, we decided to create an organization that would educate and uplift folks in our community about technology, the internet, computer technology, and let our community know it's a viable requirement going into the millennium. And thus began our path of going out, trying to teach folks of color, black folks, about the technology, about the internet, and about basic use of computers. That morphed into getting computers into homes and other organizations that were supporting us in that effort. And that went for a few years, and it went into a form of dormancy because everyone's familiar with computers now. And just about 3 years ago, we recognized that there is a huge dilemma. We have the computers. We see that from the standpoint of the success in our community, we're not doing what we're supposed to be doing. Our children are failing at an alarming rate. There's over a 50% dropout in high school. The fact that we hear tones and complaints about an exit exam. What is that all about? People realize, well, my child has passed an exit exam. And we're saying, well, that's just basically a academic level proficiency of an 8th grader. You know, 60 Minutes did a program called Dumb in America. And people around the world looking at these high school students are struggling with this. Well, how dumb are they in America? And us being a nonprofit organization, that's basically we're a nonprofit organization. People let us work with our communities and going into providing educational services within our community. And so we began our outreach a couple of years ago, really outreaching in multiple communities. So we are now providing services into about 9 different school districts in terms of providing educational services on the public side and on the private side. We're also looking at ways to outreach. We had what we have launched this next week would be our essay contest. Last year, we had a essay contest, and it was launched strictly for high schoolers, for 12th graders, and the theme last year was basically using the concepts and precepts of Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King's principles and philosophy to change my life, my community, and the world. And interesting enough, we always look for those who will lead us, and listening to the winner, how they would make a transformative world was phenomenal. That came from a teenager. And also, we forget that we're from old school. You know, I'm in my 60s, and so it's a number. So the whole notion that the whole society was transitioned by teenagers in college, made a social change, political change, and economic and political statement. But we forgot that.
Yes.
You see, and again, if you look at our notion about to learn, dream, and achieve, is the premise in which the We Can Foundation operates.
Say that again. Learn. Go ahead.
Learn, dream, and achieve. You see, we aren't learning, we stop dreaming, and what are we achieving?
Okay.
Ultimately, as a community. Those are the serious questions we must ask ourselves. We've, in a sense, lost our identity. We look at the transformative time of from leaving the plantation to the 20s, when you had a whole black consciousness movement back then. After World War I, the New Negro, that's how they defined themselves, led by the ABB, the African Blood Brotherhood, who came back from World War I, and they drew the line. You see, we're not what we seem. We had a little bit more depth. So if you understand what that was about in the movement back then, and if you realize that the ABB, they were a private organization, but they were expanding. A private, can I say, organization that was secretive in its definition.
Okay.
And it's kind of scary because they stood up and they maintained who they were and they fought the elements. And again, the elements being the element of the bird. I mean, I don't mean Donald Byrd, or I mean the Crow, Jim Crow, and the pains as it came out after 1865.
Stand up.
Stand up.
We can.
We can, and so collectively we did. And if you look at the whole social genre back then in the 20s, we had a level of consciousness, and that kind of was subdued until the 60s. Then you had the resurgence of black consciousness. You see, now we're going into a new millennium totally with the degree of unconsciousness because our children don't know who we are. We aren't telling our children about that era of Jim Crow. We talk about black history, but we don't talk about, let us realize what it would be, and this Gen 6 incident that just took place resurface our consciousness. So there's a movement to saying, let us stand up. Youth are standing up again. So let us continue that movement. So how do we continue on our reach into the community using education, using a form of connectivity? The contest that we have, the essay contest, we're launching it this time. We also have other funds, the scholarship fund that we're having, and that's dealing with music. We'll get to that. But yet, not looking at us as a people, understanding our story and constantly telling our children our story. We haven't. You know, we wait till February and then we need to pull out our dashikis and look at our black consciousness and say, well, here we are. Our children, there's a huge disconnect. You know, a child could look around and say, well, what does that have to do today? Yeah, they built the pyramids then. I'm living in the projects.
Right.
What's that?
So where's
the transition?
Yes.
So the question is, if Kofi and Marguerite talked about they had a project, we need to move out the projects by creating a larger project. You know, so how can we shift that behavior? How do we think differently about ourselves? You see, and then looking at heroes that we look at. You know, why in this essay contest that we're launching this time, one of my heroes is John Horace, and he was African Seminole. And we have 7th graders doing an essay analysis of John Horace and the Black Seminole in struggle, dealing with critical thinking. You see, that's something we really don't talk about with our community, our children, how to think critically. You see, if I go to school and say, well, I was told this without questioning, it's not what did you learn today, it's what question you asked today. Right. Because if you don't ask the question, then how do you solidify that understanding or have a better framework to operate from? You see, those are things that we need to ask ourselves. And so given that, I can honestly say that this organization really started to grow. We have people coming from my African brothers who they gave me the name Izioku, which means truth. We have a wave of young folks coming in, degreed and I would say highly educated. We have the cream of the crop, professors in different genres, lawyers, doctors, MDs, young intern MDs. And I tell the story just 2 months ago, we had a recruiting and teaching of how we want to have this educational process introduced into the school. And there were 3 tables, there was 110 in attendance. And 3 tables were all PhDs out of UCLA, had their sleeves rolled up, said, we're ready to work, you see. So, but you don't hear that much about, but we're out there, you see. And so one of the things you also do is, as an organization, recognize the absence of the man. And looking at a man, we'll look at the one program that we're involved in is the Million Fathers Back to School effort. That's 999,999 plus me getting men to take their child back to school. So if you talk about literacy, tying that to what was our struggle to become literate. And one of my heroes is another acronym that you talked about was the A part.
Yeah. Now we're getting into the C part, California.
Yes, sir.
History. History.
Yes, sir.
Now, when we were talking,
yes, sir.
And I want to transcend this because you're talking about the men showing up, taking their children, taking their sons, taking their daughters to school.
Yes.
actually physically being with them and taking them to
That's
school.
right. That's right.
I know that we were doing the African Marketplace.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And at that time, you were sharing a lot of that with me, and I was very, not amazed, but very attracted to what you were doing and how we can. And so the transition was, hey, Roscoe, here, have this
Yes,
hat.
sir. Yes, sir.
I had the hat on. I'm up at the front gate just by accident, on purpose,
Yes, sir.
and on time.
Yes, sir.
And two young teachers
That's
that
right.
drove a long ways
Yes.
came looking for you and didn't know that they had arrived.
Yes, that's right. And they came across the desert.
Yes.
Palmdale.
And then
Another Mecca, another journey.
came
Yes,
across
sir.
the desert. Maybe at the front gate, I said, I know exactly where you're going.
Yes, sir.
And ended up right there
Yes, sir. Yes,
at
sir.
your booth to do what you were doing.
Yes, sir.
And in that transition, the same thing, coming across and ended up in here in this state called California.
Yes.
Now, there's a whole historical aspect to
Oh,
it, too.
absolutely.
And let's share that as it goes into the A.
Hey, yes, sir. If I can go back even further than that,
Yes.
if I can go back into dynastical time, if I can use Queen Hatshepsut, her theme was know thyself. Okay,
Yes.
so that's something we have to rediscover ourselves. And looking at your initial question, how do we move from the young ladies and their purpose and how we need to discover self and how California itself was named after a black queen, Queen Khalifa, which was a 16th century character that came out of Spain. 1530, the notion of this mythological queen, black African queen who guarded the coast. So if you look at the migration from Egypt to Africa, from Africa to America, and then California. So it still deals with pride. You see, we tell our folks we come from kings and queens, but here's a living example, Queen Khalifa. The state is named after a black queen. And in the transition, migrating to another name, which is, you say, the historical township of Allensworth, how does that reference to knowing thyself? Because A, he was a man, again, looking at him as a model, what did he do? He struggled to learn to read. And at that time, him being a slave, the risk of being put to death, flogged, or sold for the mere effort of trying to read. And it's a tragedy that the cliche is if you want to hide something, then put it in a book, because blacks don't read. I kind of challenge that to a degree.
Yes.
A percentage of us do read, because I was honored when I saw that book expo that was taking place at Leimert Park.
Yes.
I think 100 authors from across the country came.
Yes.
And that park, that little area, Leimert Park, thousands of folks were there just to look at our authors.
Yes.
So that challenges that notion. We don't like to read, but we need to get our children to read.
Yes.
And that's the big disconnect. How do we have our children understand the value of knowledge and information? And that's what the Colonel did. He had to be a visionary. To have that vision and say, well, I will learn to read, he went from the lowest to the highest. And what did that really mean? He went from a slave to what I call the Colin Powell of the turn of the century, because he was a lieutenant colonel.
Yes.
So he had a vision. He had a vision of coming from someplace and creating a place
Yes.
of pride, self-reliance, and esteem. And that was the premise in which he operated. A businessman, entrepreneurialism. So I use that township as being our Mecca to teach our children. To say, okay, well, fine. Let's go to the township and recognize this town. And what did the man accomplish? Him being in the military, connected to the Buffalo Soldiers, all these things that our children really get a notion of, or February, and you may hear people say, well, I've gone there maybe once or twice or 3-4 years ago. That should be the most traveled location. Number one, the journey there, because it's a journey, because he left Kansas City based upon Jim Crow.
Yeah.
Looking for a place for identity, looking place for empowerment, looking place for an opportunity for growth.
Yes.
And so that's what we need to look at. We need to look at what are our visions. And I'm eliminate the television, because that's destroying us. We need to look at vision without the vision. So we.
I like the way you put that, vision without the teller. We tell ourselves.
That's right, tell ourselves.
We can,
that's
yes,
right. So,
yes.
and that's been our moving and most driving effort, is to let our children. So I have 9 grandchildren.
Okay.
And I look to see what is our legacy for them.
Yes.
You see, and how are we committed to make a change? You know, we complain, and the term I hate to use and have a problem with it. We use the term our youth. We misname. We call them gangbangers. They're still our babies.
Right.
But in every culture, the young warriors were considered warriors in the tribal sense.
Yes.
There was a village.
Yes.
You have warriors in a village.
Yes.
You don't have
That's
gangbangers. You got young warriors. So it's misdirected anger and energy because they had no sense of direction. There's no sense of where's the man. How are we not? We can solve this problem. Like example, going back to, can you imagine this? Using Allensworth, his vision, going back 2008, 100 years from the township creation. Now, looking at September 2008, can you imagine if a high school has 1,100 attendance and 60% are black? Can you imagine 600 black men going to a high school? And if you take all the schools across the districts, and have all the men go, I will take my child to school. And if you take the Latino side, their men taking their children to school, now they got collaborative relationship coming to we are here for our children. You see, and that's what we're about. So that's the movement within Allensworth, and looking at that precious notion about we have ownership of, because we're losing everything. We don't have a community, we have neighborhoods. We even take a neighbor out of neighborhood. Yes, sir. Now we have hoods.
Did you see? Ooh. Because I was just in that conversation the other day. We took neighbor out of neighborhood.
That's right. And we live in the hood.
Yes.
Clouded.
Right. Unfocused.
That's right.
But we can.
That's right. We have to.
So, nonprofit organization. I know that you're mentoring, but you're also consulting.
Yes.
And you're an entrepreneur. And as a 501(c), as a foundation, you're looking for what can I do as a we can. And I mean, when I'm saying I do, I'm speaking to our audience. What can we do for we can?
Well, that kind of moves and segues to the other part. That is the B.
Okay.
Jazz one, and I say the picture between me sitting between Miles and Train. And as Cornel West says, if you listen to blues, Miles is the blues. Train is the blues. So understand what does that mean, and the notion of coming out of Africa from Mali or to Mississippi is a syncopative sound. So what are we trying to do as the organization in the township next year, 2008? We want to have what they call Allensworth Blues Festival, the ABF.
Ooh.
So we're looking at people, number one, and talking to Barbara Morris. She was really late. I talked to her yesterday. She stopped by the office and she's all fired up. Ernie Andrews, and then of course the diva, other diva, Miss Linda Hopkins. You know, so the question is, how do we now reach out to our masters? Because we're losing our masters left and right. Our intellectual masters, our artists. So how do we transition and say, well, take youth to say, okay, here is a township that was establishing by us, music for us, by us, at the same time letting the world community know, come be a part of this. So it's an opportunity for participation. It's, you know, you support it by coming to the concert, bringing your children so they can see, like I said, going back to the notion of the Monterey Jazz Festival, to see a Linda Hopkins or some of our artists, they're walking around being a part of that township. There's a connect there, you see, and it's in getting our youth involved, and using that as a form of scholarship. Our whole purpose is to have the scholarship to raise money to reinvest in our youth. You see.
Say that one more time.
Yes, sir.
I want them to understand.
Yes.
Because, you know, we're communicating, but I want everybody to be in on this conversation.
Yes, sir.
Raising funds for scholarships to
reinvest in our youth.
Yes.
Because we have to understand, if I'm going to learn, then the basis for learning is intelligence.
Yes.
And then what is the framework of thought? And what do you learn the basis for packaging that thought and developing that thought? At the institutions and the framework for school and schooling, literacy, competency, and that moves from achievement.
Yes.
You see, so that's what's needed. So looking to say the monies that are driven from that goes, we're trying to offer 10 scholarships.
Yes.
You see, and if we offer 5,000, then you can see what that will require us to do to raise this type of money. It's not going to be easy effort, and we're looking for corporate sponsors, and if a corporation would say, like, we'd like to be a part of this, we want to take it all, or can we write a check, then they can write a check that we can. We're a nonprofit, and that money goes to our youth. Like our essay contest, we're taking monies from the monies that we're making, and we aren't making a lot of money. We're making, like any other organization, enough to make ends meet. At the same time, we have to reinvest.
Yes.
It's not just pulling from and saying, look at us, I'm in this and on that. And I use the story that I'm into transportation, but I told the story that word got out that my wife was getting a BMW. And so we got a few calls, BMW, yes, and I'm not getting a BMW, and yes, and what is BMW? Yeah, it's an acronym. BMW, Black Man Working, and I'll continue to work. So that's
right. So like the FAB.
FAB, finding another brother. Yes,
that's right.
And that's what we're asking the community as a whole, to bring our children to the township, to experience song, understanding the syncopated mood and music from Africa to the plantation, out of the plantation to the new genre. And if you look at the new song, if you look at Kanye West and his genre, and you flip the switch and you go back to Gil Scott-Heron and his Winter in America. There's a transition right there. So, Gil is Winter in America. It's still winter. We need to move out of this cold environment and move to spring and summer. And that's what we need to do. And we need to look at folks going to a location or place.
Now, let me ask you this,
yes,
because
sir.
We were talking about the technology and the internet, and there must be a way that people could go to the internet and find We Can as a foundation.
Yes, they can go to www.wecanonline.net. So it says WECANONLINE.com. We're reconstructing some of the components to show the new essay contest. The ABF will be launching a hyperlink for the blues concert and letting them know. We're looking for vendors, we're looking for people who want to participate, we're looking for youth. So we're mapping this out. So we want this concert or this promotion, this involvement of appreciating song, it's going to be inclusive, embracing, and inviting world community to come to see.
Right. Because it's the world community that has to come together.
And that's our purpose.
We're talking about 100,000 men showing up on a campus. We're talking about 100,000 men showing up with their children, rekindling, rebuilding, reinvesting in our youth.
That's right.
In terms of that reinvestment, and I know you're working with the school board.
Yes, we actually, that's the crust of where we're actually a subsidized company that actually deals with supplemental educational services. And that's where a lot of our focus is. We're still recruiting. We started out with 15 or 20, now we're over 130 in our organization. And it does me good to see a lot of our young intellectuals, a lot of our community members who know if you come into us, it has to be a commitment for our youth, our children. So it's not about the job, it's about the investment. It's about the passion you bring to it. And that's why when we do pay our instructors, we give them 65% of the monies, and that's unheard of in most companies.
Fantastic.
And so in order to stand behind the truth, which is in one dialect is yoku. So that means, how does one act truthfully in terms of creating loyalty? See, we live in a disloyal society now. Families are disloyal to one another. So how can we create a family community, but create it in a premise of loyal people to work with us? Because I don't want to have someone work for me. To me, that gives me a plantational mentality. But if you work with me, we work side by side. If you just do a different aspect of what's needed for the job to be done, and the pay comes out of that, I'm being loyal to you, and guess what? You reciprocate by being loyal to me.
So it sounds like something my father told me. He said, you do the job, the money will follow.
That's right.
You do what you're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
You focus on your essence.
That's right.
Coming into the closing part of this show,
yes, sir.
We only have a minute or two, but I want you to give the essence of what is happening with We Can. We talked about the blues, we talked about the education, we talked about Allensworth, and I want to go back to the foundation and give them whatever you want them to have on this foundation.
Well, two things. If The services is being rendered throughout the school districts. Have your child sign up because it's free. And by doing that, it shows that you're investing in your child. It's for free.
Yes.
But if you put a cost associated with it, we want to make sure that our children are competent. We want to make sure that we have new engineers and scientists coming out. Because look what happened during the 60s when there was a need to have engineers and we got into the space age.
Yes.
You see, we need to recreate that new thinking and thought paradigm that allow us to say our children are going to school, become the doctors, the engineers. That's what needs to be done. So whatever we can do to aid that, to project that, to promote that, and be a part of that, you see, to say we're the changing agents.
Yes, we can in the Jazz Zone.
That's right.
And first of all, my brother,
Yes, sir.
you know the acronym, find another brother, that's very, very heavy. It's
Yes,
find
sir.
another brother to take your child to school.
That's right.
Develop what we need to develop in terms of our education.
That's right.
Reinvest back in our community through our youth.
That's right.
Continue to support and be educated as to where we come from so we can understand the vision of where we go.
That's right.
With no vision, you will perish.
That's right.
You understand?
That's right.
First of all, I appreciate the opportunity to share you with our public in terms
Thank
of
you,
what we're
sir.
doing with the
Thank you,
Jazz
sir.
Zone. And I don't have enough information.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to ask you right in front of all this audience, this whole big living room of family, will you come back on the show?
That I will. I feel an honor. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Because yes, we can, and we all need to be about the organization, the foundation that you have,
Yes, sir.
and what we can do about it.
Right.
Please tune in to us as we welcome, we can, you can, and I can too.
That's right.
Be a part of what we need to do, reinvest in our youth. Thank you so much. Enjoy life with God's blessings. This is Roscoe Leon signing off, and you have just been in the Jazz Zone.